Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Steel. Wilson Jones stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a conquered territory. At 52, he commanded respect through presence alone. Broad shoulders that filled his tailored suits, steel gray eyes that missed nothing, and hands that bore the calluses of a man who'd built his empire from the ground up. His construction company, Jones & Associates, had erected half the skyline he surveyed. 25 years ago, Wilson had been nobody, a young man with calloused hands and an unshakable determination to escape poverty. He'd met Tracy Smith at a community college night class, both of them working multiple jobs to afford tuition. She was radiant then, with auburn hair that caught sunlight and green eyes that seemed to promise forever. She believed in his dreams when he had nothing but blueprints sketched on napkins and a beat-up pickup truck. "You're going to build something magnificent," she'd whispered during those early years, tracing the rough plans he'd drawn for their future. They married young, and she stood by him through the lean years when he took any construction job available, slowly building his reputation and his crew. Eric had arrived when Wilson was 28, a serious boy who inherited his father's piercing gaze and his mother's quick wit. Wilson had taught him everything: how to read blueprints, how to handle men, how to build something that would last. The boy was 24 now, working as Wilson's project manager, learning the business from the foundation up. But success had changed things. As Wilson's empire grew, Tracy had grown restless. The woman who once traced his dreams on paper now spent her days shopping and lunching with other wealthy wives, her world expanding into charity galas and country club politics. Wilson had provided her with everything: a mansion in the hills, luxury cars, unlimited spending. But somewhere along the way, they'd stopped building their life together. Wilson's assistant knocked and entered. "Mr. Jones, your wife called. She's reminded you about the Charity Foundation dinner tonight." Wilson nodded absently. These events had become routine, Tracy's social obligations that required his presence and checkbook. He'd noticed her increased attention to her appearance lately, the way she'd light up at certain text messages, the mysterious afternoon appointments. A lesser man might have convinced himself it was nothing. Wilson Jones was not a lesser man. His phone buzzed with a text from Eric. "Dad, finished the Henderson site inspection. Heading to the office." Wilson smiled slightly. His son was everything he'd hoped for: reliable, intelligent, and absolutely loyal. Some men built legacies in stone and steel. Wilson had built his in his son. That evening, Wilson adjusted his black tie in the mirror of their bedroom, while Tracy applied the finishing touches to her makeup. She wore a crimson dress that hugged her still attractive figure, diamonds glittering at her throat. Diamonds he bought her for their 20th anniversary. "You look beautiful," he said, meaning it. Despite everything, Tracy remained stunning at 47. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you. Are you ready? We can't be late." The Children's Hospital Charity Gala was held at the Meridian Hotel, the ballroom filled with the city's elite. Wilson moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands with business partners, city councilmen, and fellow philanthropists. He'd learned long ago that success wasn't just about building. It was about building the right relationships. He was discussing a potential municipal contract with Councilman Porter when he noticed Tracy across the room, engaged in animated conversation with a younger man. Wilson's eyes narrowed as he took in the stranger: tall, athletic build, expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the fact that he was trying too hard. The man's hand lingered on Tracy's arm a moment too long, and she leaned into him with a familiarity that made Wilson's jaw tighten. "Wilson, you were saying about the timeline." Councilman Porter prompted. Wilson refocused, completing the conversation smoothly while part of his mind cataloged every detail of the interaction across the room. 27 years of marriage had taught him to read his wife's body language. The slight tilt of her head when she laughed, the way she touched her necklace when nervous, the particular smile she reserved for people she wanted to impress. He was seeing all of it directed at this stranger. Later, as they drove home in silence, Wilson's hands gripped the steering wheel with controlled tension. "Interesting evening," he said casually. Tracy murmured, staring out the passenger window. You seem to enjoy talking with that young man at the bar. For just a moment, her composure cracked. What young man? Wilson pulled into their circular driveway, the automatic lights illuminating the columns of their Greek revival mansion. Tall, dark hair, appeared to be in his 30s. You spent quite a bit of time with him. Oh, him. Tracy's voice was carefully neutral. Matt Hubbard. He's new to the charity board. I was just being welcoming. Matt Hubbard. Wilson filed the name away as they entered their home, Tracy immediately excusing herself to wash off this makeup. Wilson poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and stood in his study, surrounded by awards and photographs documenting his rise from nothing to everything. His gaze fell on a particular photo tucked among the others. Himself and his climbing partner, Kevin, 25 years ago, grinning at the camera before their ill-fated attempt on Mount McKenna. Kevin Barber had been his closest friend then, someone he'd trusted with his life. The memory of that day still burned. The blizzard, the fall, Kevin's smirk as he'd reached for his knife. It's time to say goodbye, Kevin had said, cutting the rope that bound them together. Wilson had survived that fall through sheer luck and will, his legs shattered, but his spirit unbroken. Kevin had told the rescue teams that Wilson had fallen during the storm, that the rope had snapped under the strain. A tragic accident. Wilson had never corrected that story, had even attended Kevin's funeral 15 years later when cancer took him. But he'd never forgotten the lesson. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. Now, staring at his reflection in the study window, Wilson saw not the successful businessman, but the young man who'd learned the hardest truth of all, that the people closest to you were often the ones positioned to destroy you. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Eric's name appeared on the screen. Dad, I know it's late, but I wanted to go over the Morrison project specs with you tomorrow. Are you free for breakfast? Of course, son. 8 o'clock at the usual place. Great. And Dad? Mom seemed, I don't know, different lately. Is everything okay? Wilson's grip on the phone tightened. Even his son had noticed. Everything's fine, Eric. We'll talk tomorrow. After hanging up, Wilson returned to his bourbon and his memories. Kevin's betrayal had taught him that survival required vigilance, that weakness invited destruction. He'd built his empire on that foundation, never again allowing himself to be vulnerable, never again trusting completely. But somewhere along the way, he'd made an exception for his family. He'd allowed himself to believe that love could coexist with the ruthless pragmatism that had made him successful. Looking at that old photograph, Wilson realized he'd been a fool. Trust was a rope, and ropes could be cut. Chapter 2. The Investigation. Wilson arrived at Murphy's Diner 20 minutes early, a habit ingrained from years of wanting to control every variable in his life. The morning newspaper lay folded beside his coffee cup, but his attention was focused on his phone, scrolling through the preliminary background check he'd commissioned on Matt Hubbard. Matthew Allen Hubbard, 34, born in Seattle, moved to the city 2 years ago. MBA from Northwestern, previous employment with Hartwell Development Group in Chicago. Clean credit, no criminal record, unmarried. Currently employed as a business development consultant, a vague title that could mean anything or nothing. What was more interesting was what wasn't in the report. No long-term employment history with any single company, frequent relocations, and a lifestyle that seemed to exceed his declared income. Wilson had learned to read between the lines. Matt Hubbard was exactly the kind of smooth operator who targeted wealthy, vulnerable women. Eric arrived precisely at 8. His reliability, one of the many traits that made Wilson proud. His son had inherited his build, but with Tracy's finer features, creating a combination that turned heads but never went to his head. Eric ordered his usual black coffee and wheat toast, while Wilson watched him with calculating eyes. You mentioned Mom seemed different, Wilson said without preamble. Eric shifted uncomfortably. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. It's probably nothing. I don't deal in probably nothing. Tell me what you've observed. His son's discomfort increased, but he answered. She's a bit distracted, and she's out a lot more than usual. Yesterday, when I stopped by the house, she seemed almost startled to see me, like she wasn't expecting anyone home. Wilson absorbed this information while maintaining his neutral expression. Has she mentioned any new friends? Any changes in her routine? Dad, you're scaring me. Is Mom in some kind of trouble? That remains to be determined. Wilson leaned forward slightly. Eric, what I'm about to tell you stays between us. I have reason to believe your mother may be involved with another man. The color drained from Eric's face. Are you sure? I'm never sure of anything until I have proof. But I intend to get it. Wilson's voice carried the same tone he used when discussing construction deadlines. Calm, certain, unyielding. I need you to help me. Help you how? You have access to the house when she's not there. I need you to install these. Wilson slid a small package across the table. Security cameras. Very discreet ones. Eric stared at the package like it contained explosives. Dad, I can't spy on Mom. You can, and you will. Wilson's voice hardened. This isn't about moral qualms, son. This is about family survival. If your mother is cheating, she's not just betraying me. She's betraying you, our name, everything we've built. Would you rather discover the truth or live a lie? But what if you're wrong? Then the cameras will prove that, and we'll all be happier for it. Wilson's steel-gray eyes locked onto his son's. But I'm not wrong, Eric. I've learned to recognize betrayal. After a long moment, Eric pocketed the package. What do you want them? Bedroom, living room, her study. Anywhere she might entertain guests. They finished their breakfast in relative silence, discussing the Morrison project with forced normalcy while both their minds churned with darker thoughts. As they prepared to leave, Wilson placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Remember, son, family loyalty is everything, but it has to run both ways. Wilson spent the rest of the morning at his office, but his mind wasn't on construction contracts or building permits. He'd already set several other wheels in motion. A private investigator was conducting a more thorough background check on Matt Hubbard, while another was beginning discreet surveillance of Tracy's activities. By noon, Wilson had learned enough to confirm his suspicions. Tracy had a standing appointment every Tuesday and Thursday at the Meridian Hotel Spa, except the spa had no record of her visits during those times. Her credit card showed charges for expensive lingerie purchased last month, items he'd never seen her wear. And her phone records, which Wilson accessed through their shared family plan, showed dozens of calls to a number registered to M. Hubbard. Wilson's assistant knocked and entered with his lunch, setting it on his desk while he continued staring at the phone records. The calls had started 3 months ago, brief at first, then longer, more frequent. The pattern was unmistakable. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his private investigator. Mr. Jones? This is Patricia Clements. I have some preliminary information on the Hubbard subject. Go ahead. He's definitely not what he appears to be. His business consulting is actually a front. He specifically targets wealthy married women. I found evidence of at least 2 similar situations in Chicago before he moved here. Both ended in expensive divorces with the wives leaving their husbands. Wilson's grip on the phone tightened. Is there evidence of extortion? Nothing prosecutable, but the pattern suggests he gets these women emotionally dependent, then helps them realize they deserve better. The divorces were initiated by the wives, who then provided for Mr. Hubbard's lifestyle during and after the proceedings. A predator. Wilson had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed crystallized something cold and hard in his chest. Continue your investigation. I want to know everything about his operation. Yes, sir. There's one more thing. I followed your wife today. She didn't go to the spa. Where did she go? Apartment complex on Maple Street. Building 4, apartment 3B. Registered to M. Hubbard. Wilson thanked the investigator and hung up, his hands remarkably steady as he poured himself a glass of water. 27 years of marriage, and Tracy was in another man's apartment in the middle of the day. The knife of betrayal cut deep, but Wilson had been cut before. The pain would pass. What mattered now was the response. His phone buzzed with a text from Eric. Equipment installed. Mom never came home after her spa appointment. Sorry, Dad. Wilson typed back. Good work. Maintain normal routine. That evening, Tracy returned home with shopping bags and a glow that had nothing to do with spa treatments. She chattered about her day over dinner, weaving an elaborate fiction about massage therapy and meditation sessions. Wilson listened with the same attention he gave to construction bids, cataloging every detail, noting every inconsistency. "How was your day, dear?" she asked, cutting into her salmon. "Productive. We're breaking ground on the Morrison project next week." "That's wonderful." Her enthusiasm felt forced. "I was thinking we should take a vacation soon. Maybe Europe? It's been so long since we traveled together." Wilson studied her face. Was this guilt talking, or was she planning an exit strategy? "That sounds nice. When were you thinking? Maybe next month? I could plan something special. I'll check my schedule." Wilson's voice remained neutral, but his mind was already working. A month would give him plenty of time to prepare. If Tracy wanted to play games, he'd make sure he was playing with a stacked deck. Later that night, as Tracy slept beside him, Wilson lay awake staring at the ceiling. The cameras Eric had installed would provide evidence, but Wilson already knew what they'd show. The question wasn't whether Tracy was cheating, it was what he intended to do about it. Some men might have confronted her immediately, demanding explanations and begging for another chance. Others might have simply filed for divorce and moved on. But Wilson Jones was not some man. He was a man who'd learned the hardest lesson of all, hanging from mountainside with a cut rope. When someone betrays you, you don't forgive, you ensure they can never betray anyone again. In his mind, Wilson began to plan, not just for divorce, but for destruction. Matt Hubbard had made a career of preying on vulnerable women and destroying families. Tracy had thrown away 27 years of marriage and family for a few months of excitement. They would both learn that Wilson Jones was not a man who accepted betrayal quietly. The rope had been cut. Now it was time to see who would survive the fall. Chapter 3: The Gathering Storm. 3 weeks later, Wilson possessed enough evidence to destroy both Tracy and Matt Hubbard in court. But destruction in court wasn't what he had in mind. The hidden cameras had captured everything. Passionate encounters in his own bedroom, intimate conversations where they mocked his boring nature and planned their future together, and most damning of all, discussions about how Tracy would maximize her divorce settlement. "He'll probably try to hide assets," Matt had said, his arms around Tracy as they lay in Wilson's bed. "But I know people who can trace everything. We'll make sure you get what you deserve." "What I deserve is half of everything he's built," Tracy had replied, her voice carrying a hardness Wilson had never heard before. "Maybe more, considering how neglectful he's been." Wilson had watched these recordings with the same detached interest he might show blueprints, taking notes and planning his response. The pain of betrayal had crystallized into something far more dangerous, cold, calculating fury that demanded not just victory, but total annihilation. His private investigator had provided additional intelligence that proved invaluable. Matt Hubbard's previous victims had all followed the same pattern: seduction, emotional manipulation, divorce, and financial support until he moved on to the next target. But there was something else, something Patricia Clements had discovered through her contacts in Chicago. "Mr. Jones, I think you need to see this," she'd said during their meeting in Wilson's office. She'd slid a police report across his desk. 18 months ago, one of Hubbard's previous targets filed assault charges. Jennifer Walsh, divorced from tech executive Roy Walsh after a 2-year affair with Hubbard. She claimed he became violent when she tried to end their relationship. Wilson had read the report carefully. Jennifer Walsh had been hospitalized with a broken wrist and facial bruises. The charges had been dropped when she suddenly left town, but the medical records told a clear story. "Where is Mrs. Walsh now?" Wilson had asked. "Unknown. She disappeared completely. Sold her house through a third party, left no forwarding address. But I found something interesting. A large deposit was made to her bank account the day before she withdrew the charges. Source untraceable." The implications were clear. Matt Hubbard was more than just a predator. He was a dangerous man who'd learned to silence his victims through intimidation and payoffs. The knowledge only strengthened Wilson's resolve. Now, sitting in his study on a Thursday evening, Wilson put the finishing touches on his plan. Tracy was upstairs preparing for another spa appointment, humming softly as she chose between outfits that Wilson's money had bought for another man's pleasure. His phone buzzed with a text from Eric. "Dad, are you sure about this? Maybe we should just hire lawyers." Wilson typed back. Lawyers are for people who accept defeat. We don't. Eric had been struggling with the situation, torn between loyalty to his father and love for his mother. Wilson understood. He'd felt the same conflict 25 years ago when Kevin had cut the rope. But Eric would learn, as Wilson had, that family loyalty was a luxury that others had to earn. Wilson's phone rang. Stuart Tucker, his foreman, and the closest thing he had to a friend, though Wilson kept even that relationship carefully controlled. Boss, everything's set for tomorrow morning. The crew knows to be extra careful with the foundation work. Good. And Stuart? Make sure you're there personally. I want everything documented. Of course. Wilson, are you sure about? I'm sure. Wilson ended the call and poured himself a bourbon, savoring the burn as he contemplated tomorrow's events. Every detail had been planned with the same precision he applied to construction projects, but this would be his masterpiece. Upstairs, he heard Tracy's heels clicking across the hardwood floor. She appeared in the doorway of his study, radiant in a blue dress he'd bought her for their anniversary last year. I'm heading out for my spa appointment, she announced, her voice bright with anticipation that had nothing to do with massages. Have a good time, Wilson said, not looking up from his paperwork. Will you be home for dinner? Probably late. You know how relaxing those deep tissue sessions can be. Wilson finally looked at her, his steel gray eyes meeting her green ones. For just a moment, he saw a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or uncertainty. But it passed quickly, replaced by the excited anticipation of a woman rushing to her lover. Of course, I'll have Maria leave something in the refrigerator for you. After she left, Wilson sat in the silence of his study, surrounded by the awards and photographs that documented his rise from poverty to power. His gaze fell again on the old climbing photo, and he felt the phantom ache in his leg where it had never quite healed properly after Kevin's betrayal. Tomorrow, Matt Hubbard would learn what happened to men who cut other men's ropes. And Tracy would discover that 27 years of marriage meant nothing if you threw it away for a few months of excitement with a predator. Wilson's phone buzzed with a text from his private investigator. Subject arrived at apartment complex 2:17 p.m. Vehicle still on site. Wilson smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. Let them enjoy their afternoon together. It would be their last. His phone rang again. This time it was Gerald McBride, his attorney, and one of the few people who knew what Wilson was capable of when properly motivated. Wilson, I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain about this course of action? Once we implement your plan, there's no going back. Gerald, 25 years ago, I learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to make sure your enemies can't hurt you again. Tomorrow, I remind Matt Hubbard and my wife of that lesson. And if something goes wrong, Wilson's voice was steady as granite. Nothing will go wrong. I don't leave variables to chance anymore. After hanging up, Wilson climbed the stairs to his bedroom, the same bedroom where the cameras had captured his wife's betrayal. He stood at the window, looking out at the city lights below, each one representing lives and stories and struggles he'd never know. But tomorrow, two of those lives would intersect with his in a way they'd never forget. The blizzard that had nearly killed him 25 years ago had taught Wilson that survival required ruthlessness. Kevin had cut the rope thinking Wilson would die in the snow. Instead, Wilson had crawled out of that mountain pocket with a shattered leg and an unshakable understanding. The world was divided into predators and prey, and the only way to avoid being prey was to become something more dangerous than any predator. Matt Hubbard had spent his career targeting what he thought were easy marks, wealthy wives with inattentive husbands. But he'd made a crucial error in judgment. Wilson Jones wasn't an inattentive husband. He was a man who'd learned to recognize threats and eliminate them before they became problems. Tomorrow, the lesson would begin. Chapter 4. The Trap Springs. Friday morning dawned cold and overcast, the kind of gray sky that promised rain before noon. Wilson arrived at the Morrison construction site before sunrise, checking every detail of the foundation work that would begin today. The concrete mixer trucks were scheduled to arrive at 9 a.m. The crew would begin the pour by 9:30, and Matt Hubbard would discover that some foundations were more dangerous than others. Stuart Tucker met him at the gate, hard hat already in place, his weathered face showing concern. "Boss, I've been thinking about this all night. Maybe there's another way. Stewart, you've worked for me for 15 years. In that time, have I ever made a decision I regretted?" "No, sir, but—" "Then trust me now." Wilson's voice carried the authority that had built an empire. "Everything that happens today happens for a reason." The construction site was a maze of equipment and materials, with deep excavation for the building's foundation. Safety barriers surrounded the most dangerous areas, but Wilson knew that accidents could happen to anyone who wasn't paying proper attention to their surroundings. At 8:45 a.m., Wilson's phone buzzed with a text from his private investigator. Subject left apartment complex with female target. Heading downtown, Wilson smiled grimly. Matt Hubbard was coming, just as Wilson had known he would. The anonymous tip about a business opportunity at the construction site had been carefully crafted to appeal to a man always looking for his next score. The promise of insider information about upcoming development contracts would be irresistible to someone in Hubbard's line of work. "Eric should be here any minute," Stewart observed, watching the gate. "No, I called him this morning and told him I needed him at the office today. Some things a son shouldn't have to witness." Stewart's expression darkened further, but he nodded. Wilson had always protected Eric from the harder realities of business, just as he'd protected him from the truth about Kevin's betrayal all those years ago. But Eric was learning, slowly, that the world required hard men to make hard choices. The concrete trucks arrived on schedule, their massive drums turning slowly as they positioned themselves around the foundation excavations. Wilson watched the preparations with the same attention he'd given to every construction project, but today carried additional significance. Today he was building something more than a foundation. He was constructing justice. At 9:15 a.m., a black BMW pulled through the construction gate. Wilson recognized the car from his investigator's reports, and his jaw tightened as he saw both Matt Hubbard and Tracy exit the vehicle. She wasn't supposed to be here, but Wilson adapted quickly to changing circumstances. If anything, her presence would make the lesson more complete. Matt Hubbard approached with the confident swagger of a man who'd never faced real consequences. He was exactly as Wilson had expected, tall, athletic, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide his essential softness. This was a man who'd learned to take what he wanted through charm and manipulation, never through genuine strength. "Mr. Jones? I'm Matt Hubbard. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Wilson shook his hand, noting the soft palm and manicured nails. "Mr. Hubbard, I understand you're interested in discussing some business opportunities." "I am indeed. I represent several investors who are very interested in your upcoming projects." Tracy stood slightly behind Matt, her face pale and nervous. She'd clearly been surprised by the location and was beginning to realize that this meeting wasn't what Matt had expected either. "Well then, let me show you what we're working on." Wilson gestured toward the foundation excavations. "The Morrison project will be our largest development yet. 30 stories, premium location, guaranteed to transform this part of the city." As they walked toward the construction area, Wilson kept up a steady patter about building techniques and profit margins, watching Matt's eyes grow more interested with each mention of potential returns. Greed was such a predictable weakness. "The foundation work is the most critical phase," Wilson explained as they approached the edge of the deepest excavation. "One mistake here, and the entire structure becomes unstable." Below them, workers moved like ants, preparing the rebar and positioning equipment. The excavation was 30 feet deep, its walls held back by temporary supports that looked solid, but were actually more fragile than they appeared. "Impressive operation," Matt said, leaning forward to get a better look. "How long does a foundation pour like this typically take?" 4 to 6 hours, depending on conditions." Wilson glanced at his watch. "In fact, we're scheduled to begin in just a few minutes. Perfect timing for you to see the process." Tracy moved closer to the edge, her expression troubled. "Wilson, what exactly is this meeting about? Matt said you wanted to discuss investments, but you're wondering why your husband would want to do business with your lover?" Wilson's voice remained conversational, but both Matt and Tracy froze. "Did you really think I didn't know, Tracy?" Matt's face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, then a kind of predatory confidence. I don't know what you think you know, Jones, but I know that you've been sleeping with my wife for 3 months. I know about the apartment on Maple Street, the expensive gifts you've been buying with her money, and your charming discussions about maximizing her divorce settlement. Wilson's voice never rose above normal conversational level, but something in his tone made both of them step back from the excavation edge. "Wilson, please, let me explain," Tracy began, but Wilson held up a hand. "No explanations needed. I have cameras in our bedroom, Tracy. I've seen everything." Wilson turned to Matt, his steel-gray eyes boring into the younger man. "I've also done some research on your previous relationships, Mr. Hubbard. Jennifer Walsh sends her regards, by the way." Matt's face went white. That was completely different. Was it? Because from where I stand, you're a predator who targets wealthy women, seduces them, helps them destroy their marriages, then moves on to the next victim when you've extracted everything you can. "You don't understand the situation," Matt said, his smooth confidence beginning to crack. Tracy was unhappy. What she wanted was irrelevant. Wilson's voice carried the finality of a judge's gavel. "What matters is what you took from me. My wife, my trust, my family stability. And now it's time to discuss repayment." The sound of approaching machinery grew louder as the concrete trucks positioned themselves for the pour. Wilson glanced at his watch again, noting that Stewart and the crew were right on schedule. "Wilson, what are you doing?" Tracy's voice rose with panic. "I'm finishing what someone started 25 years ago on Mount McKenna." Wilson reached into his jacket and pulled out an old photograph, the climbing picture of himself and Kevin. "Kevin Barber was my best friend, just like you were my wife, and Matt here thought he could be my replacement. Do you want to know what Kevin taught me about betrayal, Tracy?" Matt was backing away now, his predator instincts finally recognizing a more dangerous threat. But Wilson had positioned them carefully, and there was nowhere to run except toward the construction crew, who would follow Stewart's orders without question. "He taught me that some ropes need to be cut," Wilson continued, his voice carrying clearly over the machinery noise, "and that the only way to survive a fall is to make sure you're not the one who's falling." The concrete trucks began to move into position, their massive weight making the temporary supports around the excavation strain and shift. Wilson had calculated this moment precisely. The additional vibration would be just enough to destabilize the supports near where Matt and Tracy stood. "The thing about foundations, Mr. Hubbard, is that they're only as strong as the ground they're built on. And you've been building your life on very unstable ground." Wilson stepped back as the first support beam groaned and shifted. Matt lunged forward, grabbing Wilson's arm. "You're insane. You can't. I could do whatever I want on my construction site," Wilson replied calmly, easily breaking Matt's grip. "The question is whether you're smart enough to learn from this experience or stupid enough to force me to make it permanent." The beam shifted again, sending small stones tumbling into the excavation. Tracy screamed, finally understanding that Wilson wasn't just confronting them. He was demonstrating exactly how precarious their position had become. "Wilson, please," she cried. "I'll end it. I'll never see him again." "Too late for that, Tracy. Some ropes, once cut, can't be retied." The concrete mixer began its approach, the ground vibrating under its massive weight. Wilson calculated that they had perhaps 30 seconds before the temporary supports would fail completely, sending anyone standing too close tumbling into the excavation. But 30 seconds was enough time for Matt Hubbard to learn his most important lesson yet. Chapter 5. The Price of Betrayal. The temporary support beam gave way with a sharp crack that echoed across the construction site. Matt Hubbard scrambled backward as the edge of the excavation crumbled, sending chunks of concrete and debris tumbling into the 30-foot pit below. Tracy screamed, grabbing onto a piece of rebar to steady herself as the ground shifted beneath her feet. Wilson stood just far enough back to be safe, watching with the calm demeanor of a man who'd planned every detail. The concrete trucks continued their approach, their drivers following Stewart's signals, unaware of the drama unfolding at the excavation's edge. Jesus Christ, Wilson! Matt gasped, his expensive suit now torn and dirty. You could have killed us. Could have, Wilson agreed mildly. But I didn't. Consider it a demonstration of what happens when you build your life on unstable foundations. Stuart Tucker approached, his face grim but unsurprised. Wilson had prepared him for this moment, though not for all the details. Boss, we need to secure this area before someone gets hurt. Good idea, Stuart. Why don't you escort Mr. Hubbard and Mrs. Jones to safety while I assess the damage? As Stuart herded them away from the dangerous edge, Wilson surveyed the scene with professional interest. The support failure looked completely accidental, the kind of thing that happened on construction sites when heavy machinery operated too close to temporary structures. The insurance investigators would find nothing suspicious. But Matt Hubbard and Tracy would never forget the lesson. 20 minutes later, they sat in Wilson's construction trailer, Tracy wrapped in a blanket someone had found while Matt tried to restore his dignity by straightening his ruined suit. Wilson poured himself coffee from the machine in the corner, taking his time before addressing them. Now that we've had our little object lesson, he began conversationally. Let's discuss your futures. You're completely insane, Matt said, his voice shaking with rage and fear. I could have you arrested for attempted murder. Wilson sipped his coffee calmly. Could you? Stuart, what did you see happen out there? Stuart Tucker, who'd been standing by the door, spoke without hesitation. Support beam failure due to ground vibration from the concrete trucks. Happens sometimes when the soil conditions aren't properly assessed. Lucky nobody was seriously hurt. And the crew? Wilson asked. They'll say the same thing. Accidents happen on construction sites, especially when visitors don't follow safety protocols. Matt's face went white as he realized the trap was more comprehensive than he'd imagined. You planned this. All of it. I plan everything, Mr. Hubbard. It's how I built an empire while men like you were learning to prey on other people's weaknesses. Wilson set down his coffee cup and fixed Matt with his steel gray stare. Now, let's discuss what happens next. Tracy spoke for the first time since the incident, her voice barely above a whisper. Wilson, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but you're right. It doesn't mean anything. Wilson's voice carried no warmth, no trace of the man who'd once loved her. 27 years of marriage, and you threw it away for 3 months with a con artist. He's not a con artist, Tracy protested, then immediately looked stricken as she realized she was still defending Matt. Wilson pulled out a manila folder and placed on the desk between them. Matthew Allen Hubbard, age 34. Previous relationships with Margaret Sinclair of Chicago. Divorced from investment banker Charles Sinclair after a 2-year affair with you. Settlement for $1 million. Jennifer Walsh of Chicago. Divorced from tech executive Roy Walsh after an 18-month affair with you. Settlement. $6 million, plus ongoing support payments until she mysteriously disappeared. Matt's face had gone from white to gray. Those were legitimate relationships. Were they? Because I have investigators looking into both women's disappearances right now. Funny how your former lovers tend to vanish when they become inconvenient. Wilson opened the folder and spread photographs across the desk, surveillance photos of Matt with various women, financial records showing large deposits and withdrawals, and most damning of all, copies of threatening messages sent to Jennifer Walsh before she dropped the assault charges. Here's what's going to happen, Wilson continued, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to having his orders followed. You're going to leave my city, Mr. Hubbard. Tonight, you're going to close your apartment, cancel your lease, and disappear. And you're never going to contact my wife again. And if I don't, Matt's voice cracked slightly. Wilson smiled, an expression that never reached his eyes. Then my investigators will continue digging into your past. They'll find Jennifer Walsh, and probably Margaret Sinclair too. They'll discover whatever you did to keep them quiet. And then we'll have a very different conversation about justice. You can't prove anything. I don't have to prove anything in a courtroom, Mr. Hubbard. I just have to make your life sufficiently unpleasant that you decide to seek opportunities elsewhere. Wilson leaned back in his chair. You see, I have resources you can't imagine. Money, connections, people who owe me favors. I can make you unemployable in every major city in America. I could have you audited by the IRS every year for the rest of your life. I could ensure that every woman you meet learns about your history before you get a chance to work your charm. The trailer fell silent except for the sound of construction equipment outside. Wilson let the implications sink in before continuing. Or you could simply leave, and we'll pretend this unfortunate misunderstanding never happened. Matt looked at Tracy, perhaps hoping for support or encouragement, but she was staring at her hands, finally understanding the magnitude of what she'd done. When he looked back at Wilson, his predator's confidence had completely evaporated. How long do I have? 24 hours. Stewart will escort you off the property now, and I expect you to be gone by this time tomorrow. Matt stood on unsteady legs, his expensive suit hanging on him like a costume that no longer fit. This isn't over, Jones. Wilson's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold as winter. Oh, but it is. You see, Mr. Hubbard, you made a crucial error in judgment. You thought you were hunting a sheep, but you've been circling a wolf. And now you've learned what happens when a wolf decides to hunt back. Stewart opened the trailer door and gestured for Matt to leave. As he reached the threshold, Wilson called out one last time. Mr. Hubbard, if I ever hear you've hurt another woman the way you hurt Jennifer Walsh, I'll finish what I started today. That's not a threat, it's a promise. After Matt left, Wilson and Tracy sat in silence for several long minutes. Finally, she looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. What happens to me? Wilson studied his wife of 27 years, seeing not the radiant young woman he'd married, but a stranger who'd betrayed everything they'd built together. That depends on you, Tracy. Do you want to fight this? Or do you want to accept reality? What reality? The reality that our marriage is over. The reality that you chose 3 months of excitement over 27 years of commitment. The reality that you conspired with a predator to steal what I've spent my life building. Tracy's sobs grew louder, but Wilson felt no sympathy. You could have come to me if you were unhappy. You could have asked for counseling, for changes, for anything except betrayal. Instead, you chose to sneak around in our own bed with a man who was planning to rob us both. I didn't know about his past, she whispered. Of course you didn't, because you didn't want to know. You wanted the excitement, the attention, the feeling of being desired. You didn't care about the cost. Wilson stood and walked to the window, looking out at the construction site where workers were already repairing the damaged excavation. I'm filing for divorce. Tracy, you can make this easy on both of us, or you can make it difficult. But the outcome will be the same. What about Eric? The question hit Wilson harder than he'd expected, but his voice remained steady. Eric will have to choose. Loyalty runs both ways in our family. He's my son, too, and he's old enough to understand what you've done. Wilson turned back to face her. The cameras in our bedroom recorded everything, Tracy. Every conversation about hiding assets, every plan to maximize your settlement, every moment you mocked the man who gave you everything you have. Tracy's face crumpled. I never meant for it to go this far, but it did. And now we all have to live with the consequences. Wilson called Stewart back into the trailer. Please escort Mrs. Jones to her car. I'll be working late tonight. As Tracy gathered herself to leave, Wilson made one final statement. You have a choice to make, Tracy. You can accept a reasonable settlement and maintain some dignity, or you can fight me and lose everything. But remember, I'm the man who survived Kevin's betrayal on Mount McKenna. I'm the man who built an empire from nothing. And I'm the man who just demonstrated that some foundations are too dangerous to stand on. After she left, Wilson sat alone in the trailer, listening to the sounds of construction resuming outside. The concrete pour would continue on schedule. The foundation would be stronger than before, and the Morrison project would stand for decades as a testament to proper planning and execution. Just like his revenge. Chapter 6. The Son's Choice. Eric Jones sat in his car outside his mother's house for 20 minutes before finally walking to the front door. Wilson had called him 2 hours earlier with a simple message. Your mother and I need to talk to you. Tonight, 7 o'clock. The tone had told Eric everything he needed to know. This wasn't about family dinner or construction projects. This was about the thing they'd all been dancing around for weeks. The cameras, the surveillance, the growing tension that had turned their home into a battlefield where only one side knew they were fighting. Maria, their housekeeper, answered the door with a sad smile of someone who'd witnessed the family's dissolution firsthand. Your parents are in the study, Mijo. They're waiting for you. Eric found Wilson and Tracy sitting on opposite sides of the room, like opposing attorneys preparing for trial. His father occupied his usual chair behind the massive oak desk, while his mother sat on the leather sofa, her face puffy from crying but her posture defiant. "Sit down, son," Wilson said without preamble. "There are some things you need to know." For the next 30 minutes, Wilson laid out the evidence with the same methodical precision he used for construction presentations. The financial records, the surveillance footage, the background investigation on Matt Hubbard. Everything presented in chronological order with supporting documentation. Eric listened in growing horror as his parents' marriage disintegrated before his eyes, reduced to timestamps and bank records and video evidence that painted his mother as a stranger. "So you see," Wilson concluded, his voice devoid of emotion, "your mother made a choice. She chose a predator over her family. She chose excitement over stability. She chose betrayal over loyalty." Tracy finally spoke, her voice strained but determined. "It wasn't that simple, Eric. Your father doesn't understand." "I understand perfectly," Wilson interrupted. "You were bored. You felt neglected. You wanted attention. So instead of talking to your husband, you decided to sleep with a con artist who's made a career of destroying marriages." "He's not a con artist." Wilson's eyes flashed dangerously. "Even now, after everything I've shown you, you defend him. Even after he nearly got you killed at the construction site, you still can't see what he really is." Eric looked between his parents, feeling like a child caught in the middle of a war he didn't understand. "What construction site? What happened today?" Wilson and Tracy exchanged a look that carried 27 years of shared history and recent devastation. Finally, Wilson spoke. "Your mother and her boyfriend had a little accident today. Nothing serious, but educational. They learned that some foundations aren't as stable as they appear." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a building fire. Eric had worked construction long enough to understand what his father was really saying, and the knowledge made him sick. "Dad, tell me you didn't." "I didn't do anything except demonstrate a simple principle of physics. Actions have consequences, and unstable foundations eventually collapse." Tracy stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. "He tried to kill us, Eric. Your father lured Matt to that construction site and arranged for an accident that could have." "Could have what?" Wilson's voice remained calm. "Could have taught you both a lesson about respect. Could have shown you what happens when people try to steal from me." He fixed his son with that steel-gray stare. "Or could have finished what Kevin Barber started 25 years ago." The reference to Kevin hit Eric like a physical blow. He'd heard the story of his father's climbing accident many times over the years, but always as a tale of survival and determination. Now, for the first time, he understood that there had been more to it. "Kevin cut the rope," Wilson continued, his voice carrying the weight of old pain and hard-learned wisdom. "My best friend, my climbing partner, the man I trusted with my life. He cut the rope and left me to die in a snowbank with a shattered leg. Do you know what that taught me, son?" Eric shook his head, not trusting his voice. "It taught me that loyalty is the only thing that matters. Everything else, love, friendship, marriage vows, it's all just words until someone decides they want something more than they want to keep their promises." Wilson's gaze shifted to Tracy. "Your mother decided she wanted excitement more than she wanted our family." "That's not true," Tracy protested. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore." "You mattered," Wilson said quietly. "You mattered enough that I gave you everything I had. You mattered enough that I trusted you with my heart, my home, my son's respect. And you threw it all away for 3 months with a man who was planning to rob us blind." Eric felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders like a construction beam. Everything he believed about his family, his parents, his future, it was all crumbling like that excavation wall his father had described. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. Wilson leaned forward, his expression intense, but not unkind. "I want you to choose, son. Your mother has decided to destroy this family for a man who preys on lonely women. I've decided to protect what we've built, even if it means cutting loose the people who won't fight for it. You can't make him choose sides, Tracy said desperately. He's my son, too. He's my son, Wilson replied with finality. I raised him. I taught him everything he knows about business, about life, about what it means to be a man. I showed him how to build something that lasts. His voice hardened. You showed him how to tear it down. Eric looked at his mother, seeing not the woman who'd kissed his scraped knees and helped with homework, but a stranger who'd shattered their family for reasons he couldn't understand. Then he looked at his father, the man who'd taught him everything about strength and loyalty and the price of betrayal. Mom, he said quietly, did you really discuss hiding Dad's assets? Did you really plan to take as much as you could in a divorce? Tracy's silence was answer enough. And this Matt guy, did you know about his history? About what he did to other women? I know. Not first, but later, when Wilson told me. She trailed off, unable to finish. But you stayed with him anyway, Eric said, the words hitting him like hammer blows. Even after you knew he was dangerous, you stayed with him. It wasn't that simple. It was exactly that simple. Eric stood, his decision crystallizing with the clarity of a blueprint. Dad, I want to know everything. All of it. What really happened with Kevin, what happened today at the construction site, what you're planning to do about Matt Hubbard. Wilson nodded approvingly. And your mother? Eric looked at Tracy one last time, memorizing the face of the woman who'd chosen a predator over her family. Mom, I love you. I'll always love you. But I can't respect what you've done. And I can't stand with someone who betrayed everything Dad built for us. Tracy's sob echoed through the study like a death knell. Eric, please. I'm still your mother. You're the woman who gave birth to me, Eric replied, his voice steadier than he felt. But mothers protect their children. They don't conspire to steal their inheritance with con artists. Wilson stood and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. It's a hard choice, but it's the right one. Loyalty has to mean something, or it means nothing. As Tracy gathered her purse to leave, Wilson made one final offer. The divorce settlement I'm prepared to offer is generous. Tracy, you can live comfortably for the rest of your life if you sign the papers and disappear quietly. But if you fight me, if you try to drag this through the courts and damage our family's reputation further, I'll destroy you completely. Ow, she whispered. Wilson's smile was colder than the mountain wind that had nearly killed him 25 years ago. The same way I destroyed Matt Hubbard's foundation today. Systematically, completely, and without mercy. After Tracy left, Wilson poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed one to his son. To the Jones family, he said simply. Eric raised his glass, understanding that he'd just chosen more than sides in a divorce. He'd chosen a worldview, a philosophy, a way of being in the world that brooked no betrayal and offered no second chances. To loyalty, he replied. They drank in silence, father and son, the last 2 members of a family that had been destroyed by cut ropes and broken promises. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, each one representing lives and dreams and families that might survive what theirs had not. But Wilson Jones had learned long ago that survival required hard choices. And sometimes, the people you loved most were the ones who forced you to make them. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 2 weeks after Matt Hubbard's hasty departure from the city, Wilson received the call he'd been expecting. Patricia Clements, his private investigator, had been tracking Hubbard's movements across state lines with the persistence of a bloodhound. Mr. Jones? We found Jennifer Walsh. Wilson leaned back in his office chair, watching the morning sun illuminate the city he'd helped build. Where? Small town in Montana, working as a waitress under an assumed name. She's been hiding there for 18 months, ever since she left Chicago. Mr. Jones, she wants to talk. Set up a meeting. Somewhere private. Already done. She'll meet you tomorrow at the Riverside Cafe in Millfield, Montana. 2 o'clock. Wilson hung up and stared at the old climbing photograph on his desk. Kevin's smiling face looked back at him, frozen in that moment before betrayal had taught them both who they really were. Tomorrow, he would finally close the book on Matt Hubbard's predatory career. The flight to Montana gave Wilson time to review the complete file Patricia had assembled on Jennifer Walsh. Married at 23 to Roy Walsh, a successful tech entrepreneur. No children. Divorced at 29 after Roy discovered her affair with Matt Hubbard. The settlement had been substantial, $6 million plus the house, but Jennifer had liquidated everything and disappeared after dropping the assault charges. Reading between the lines, Wilson saw the familiar pattern: seduction, manipulation, isolation from family and friends, then escalation to violence when a victim tried to break free. Matt Hubbard was more than just a con artist. He was a predator who'd learned to silence his victims through fear. Millfield was the kind of small town that existed in the shadow of mountains, where people came to disappear and start over. The Riverside Cafe occupied a corner building with windows that offered a clear view of anyone approaching, and Wilson understood why Jennifer had chosen it for their meeting. She was smaller than he'd expected, with brown hair that might have been blonde before she'd changed it, and eyes that constantly scanned the room like those of a hunted animal. When Wilson introduced himself, her handshake was firm, but her fingers trembled slightly. "Thank you for coming," she said as they settled into a booth in the back corner. "When your investigator contacted me, I wasn't sure if I should run again or finally stand and fight." "What changed your mind?" "She told me what he did to your wife. And she told me you'd already made him disappear." Jennifer's voice carried a mixture of hope and fear. "Is it true? Is he really gone?" Wilson nodded. "Matt Hubbard left the city 2 weeks ago. He won't be coming back." For the first time since he'd arrived, Jennifer's shoulders relaxed slightly. "How did you manage it?" "He told me once that he had insurance policies, ways to protect himself if anyone tried to expose him. Men like Hubbard are only dangerous when they're hunting prey that can't fight back. When they encounter a real predator, they usually discover they're not as strong as they thought." Jennifer smiled, a bitter expression that spoke of hard-won wisdom. "You're not like the other husbands, are you? Most of them just want to pretend it never happened, sweep it under the rug, and move on." "I'm not most men." Wilson pulled out a digital tablet and placed it on the table between them. "I want to show you something." The screen displayed financial records, travel documents, and surveillance photos that painted a comprehensive picture of Matt Hubbard's activities over the past 2 years. Jennifer's eyes widened as she recognized the patterns. "He's done this before. To other women. At least 6 that we've identified. The pattern is always the same. Target wealthy married women, seduce them, manipulate them into leaving their husbands, then disappear with whatever assets they can access." Wilson swiped to a new screen. "But you were different. You tried to leave him before the divorce was final." Jennifer's hand went unconsciously to her wrist, where Wilson could see the faint outline of an old scar. "He didn't like being rejected. Said I belonged to him now, that I couldn't just walk away after everything he'd done for me." "What exactly did he do to you?" The question hung in the air for several long moments. When Jennifer finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He broke my wrist when I told him I wanted to end it. Said it was an accident, that I'd fallen down the stairs. Then he showed me photos of the other women, told me what happened to ones who didn't cooperate." She looked up at Wilson with haunted eyes. "He said he'd make me disappear completely if I didn't drop the charges." Wilson absorbed this information with the same calm demeanor he might show reviewing construction blueprints. "Do you still have those photos?" "I kept copies. Hidden. I thought maybe someday." She trailed off, then seemed to gather her courage. "Your investigator said you might be able to help them. The other women." "That's exactly what I intend to do." Wilson leaned forward slightly. "But I need your help. Your testimony, your evidence, your willingness to stand up and fight back." "He'll kill me if he finds out I'm talking to you." "He'll try." But Matt Hubbard is about to discover that cutting ropes works both ways. Wilson spent the next hour explaining his plan, watching Jennifer's expression shift from fear to hope to grim determination. By the time he finished, she was sitting straighter, her voice stronger, her eyes focused on something beyond mere survival. "When do we start?" she asked. "We already have. Patricia has been tracking Hubbard's movements since he left my city. He's currently in Phoenix, Arizona, pursuing a woman named Margaret Sinclair. the widow of a real estate developer who died 6 months ago. Jennifer's face paled. Margaret? But she was one of his previous victims. Her husband divorced her because of Matt. And now she's alone, wealthy, and probably desperate for companionship. The perfect target for a man who specializes in exploiting vulnerability. We have to warn her. We will. But first, we're going to give Mr. Hubbard a taste of his own medicine. Wilson pulled out his phone and showed Jennifer a series of photographs taken by his surveillance team. Matt Hubbard entering an upscale restaurant with an elegant woman in her 50s, the two of them holding hands across a candlelit table. Matt helping her into his car with the practiced charm of a professional seducer. Margaret Sinclair, Wilson explained, widow of Robert Sinclair, inherited a real estate empire worth approximately $40 million. She's lonely, vulnerable, and exactly the kind of target Hubbard prefers. How long has he been working on her? 3 days. He's moving faster than usual, probably because he's nervous about being exposed. That gives us an advantage. Jennifer studied the photos with the intensity of a general planning a battle. What do you need me to do? Wilson smiled, an expression that would have terrified Matt Hubbard if he'd been there to see it. I need you to make a phone call. Tell Mrs. Sinclair exactly who she's having dinner with. Give her the photos, the evidence, the truth about what Matt Hubbard really is. And then we sit back and watch his foundation crumble. Wilson's phone buzzed with a text from Stuart Tucker. Everything's ready in Phoenix. Just say the word. Looking across the table at Jennifer Walsh, Wilson saw not the broken victim Matt Hubbard had tried to create, but a woman who'd found her strength in the shadow of mountains and small-town anonymity. She'd learned the same lesson Wilson had learned hanging from a cut rope 25 years ago. Sometimes the only way to survive is to become more dangerous than the people trying to destroy you. Make the call, Wilson said simply. Jennifer pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized from the surveillance reports. When Margaret Sinclair answered, Jennifer's voice was steady and clear. Mrs. Sinclair? My name is Jennifer Walsh. I need to tell you about the man you've been seeing. His name is Matt Hubbard, and he's not who he claims to be. Wilson listened as Jennifer systematically destroyed Matt Hubbard's latest con, providing details and evidence that no victim could ignore. When she finished, Margaret Sinclair was crying on the other end of the line, but they were tears of relief rather than devastation. Thank you, Margaret whispered. Thank you for saving me. After Jennifer hung up, Wilson placed a call of his own. Stuart Tucker answered on the first ring. It's time, Wilson said simply. In Phoenix, Arizona, Matt Hubbard was about to learn that some mountains were more dangerous to climb than others. And some men, when pushed off a cliff, didn't just survive the fall, they came back with avalanches. Chapter 8, The Avalanche. Matt Hubbard stood in the lobby of the Phoenix Grandview Hotel, checking his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. Margaret Sinclair was 20 minutes late for their dinner date, and his predator instincts were beginning to sense something wrong. In his line of work, disrupted patterns usually meant exposed lies. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meeting moved to Pinnacle Construction Site. 1247 Desert View Road. Margaret wants to see your investment proposal there. Matt frowned at the message. Margaret hadn't mentioned anything about construction investments, and meeting at a job site seemed odd for someone of her social standing. But wealthy widows sometimes had eccentric requests, and Matt had learned to adapt to his target's preferences. He drove his rental car through the desert evening, following GPS coordinates to an area where luxury developments were sprouting like expensive cacti. The Pinnacle Construction sign marked a site that would eventually become another high-end resort. But for now, it was just excavations and equipment scattered across several acres. Matt parked near the construction trailer, noting that Margaret's Mercedes was nowhere to be seen. His unease increased as he approached the trailer, where a single light burned in the window. He knocked on the door, and a gravelly voice called out for him to enter. The man behind the desk was not Margaret Sinclair. He was broad-shouldered and weathered, with the kind of hands that spoke of decades working with tools and machinery. A hard hat sat on the desk beside an open bottle of beer, and the man's eyes held the steady gaze of someone accustomed to dangerous work. "You must be Matt Hubbard," the man said without standing. "I'm Stuart Tucker, foreman for this project. Mrs. Sinclair asked me to meet with you." "Where is Margaret?" Matt's smooth confidence was beginning to crack. "She's not coming." Stuart took a long pull from his beer. "Seems she got a very interesting phone call this afternoon. From a woman named Jennifer Walsh." Matt's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. Jennifer told Mrs. Sinclair all about your little hobby. The photos, the threats, the way you like to break things when women try to leave you." Stuart's voice remained conversational, but there was something underneath it that made Matt step back toward the door. "This is ridiculous. I'm leaving." "No, you're not." The trailer door opened behind Matt, and two men entered. Both wore construction clothes and had the build of workers who settled disputes with their hands rather than their words. Matt recognized the setup. He was trapped. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cracking. Stuart stood slowly, his massive frame filling the small trailer. "We want to have a conversation about respect, about what happens to men who hurt women, about the difference between predators and prey." "You can't do this. I'll call the police." "Go ahead." Stuart gestured to Matt's phone. "Tell them you're being held at a construction site by men who know all about Jennifer Walsh, Margaret Sinclair, and the 6 other women whose lives you've destroyed." Matt's hand trembled as he reached for his phone, then stopped. Stuart was right. Calling the police would only accelerate his exposure. "What do you want from me?" "First, you're going to sign some papers." Stuart pulled out a manila folder and spread documents across the desk. "Confessions to extortion, assault, and fraud. Detailed accounts of every woman you victimized. Evidence that will put you in prison for the next 20 years. I'll never sign those." Stuart smiled, an expression that never reached his eyes. "Oh, I think you will. You see, Mr. Hubbard, this conversation is being recorded. And in about 10 minutes, you're going to have a little accident." "What kind of accident?" "The kind that happens to men who don't watch where they're walking around excavation sites. Very dangerous places, construction sites. Especially at night, when the lighting is poor and the safety barriers might not be properly secured." Matt looked around the trailer, finally understanding the full scope of the trap. These weren't random construction workers. They were professionals, acting with the precision and planning of a military operation. "Wilson Jones sent you," he said, the pieces finally clicking together. "Mr. Jones is a man who believes in justice. When the law doesn't provide it, sometimes working men have to take matters into their own hands." Stuart pulled out a tablet and showed Matt surveillance photos from the past 2 weeks. Images of him with Margaret Sinclair, entering her house, leaving expensive restaurants, playing the role of devoted suitor while planning her financial destruction. "Sign the papers, Mr. Hubbard. Confess to your crimes. Make it easy on yourself. And if I do, what then?" "Then you disappear. Completely. New identity, new location, new life somewhere far away from wealthy women and construction sites." Stuart leaned forward. "But if you ever hurt another woman, if you ever run another con, if you ever so much as think about coming back to this part of the country, we'll finish what we started here tonight." Matt stared at the confession papers, his hands shaking as he realized the full scope of his situation. Wilson Jones hadn't just driven him out of one city. He'd orchestrated a comprehensive destruction of Matt's entire operation. "How did you find me so fast?" "Mr. Jones has friends everywhere. Construction is a small world, and word travels fast about men who need to be taught lessons about respect." With trembling fingers, Matt began to sign the documents. Each signature felt like a nail in the coffin of his old life, but the alternative was worse. He'd seen the cold calculation in Wilson Jones's eyes, had experienced firsthand what happened to men who underestimated the builder's reach. As he finished the last signature, Stuart gathered the papers and handed him a plane ticket. "Flight to Seattle leaves in 2 hours. There's a car waiting outside to take you to the airport. Your luggage is already in the trunk. My apartment. Already cleaned out. Your lease is terminated, your utilities canceled, your forwarding address listed as general delivery in Seattle." Stuart's efficiency was terrifying in its completeness. "You have a new identity waiting. Michael Thompson, construction worker, clean background, no connections to Matt Hubbard." Matt took the ticket with numb fingers. "What about my money?" My accounts. Frozen pending investigation into your extortion activities. But don't worry, Michael Thompson will find work in Seattle. Honest work, building things instead of destroying them. As Matt prepared to leave, Stewart made one final statement that sent chills down his spine. Mr. Hubbard, Jennifer Walsh wanted me to give you a message. She said to tell you that some ropes, once cut, leave scars that never heal. But sometimes those scars make people stronger. Matt stumbled out of the trailer and into the desert night, where a black sedan waited with its engine running. As he got into the passenger seat, he caught a glimpse of the driver, another hard-faced construction worker who probably knew exactly what had just transpired in the trailer. As the car pulled away from the construction site, Matt's phone buzzed with a final text from Wilson Jones. Michael Thompson's first job starts Monday at 6 a.m. Try not to disappoint your new employers. They don't tolerate unreliable workers. The message was clear. Wilson Jones had created a new identity for him, but it came with conditions. He would work honest jobs, live an honest life, and never again prey on vulnerable women. The alternative was a return visit from Stuart Tucker and his colleagues. Matt, now Michael, stared out at the desert landscape rushing past, understanding that his career as a predator was over. Wilson Jones had done more than just drive him away. He'd systematically dismantled his entire operation and rebuilt him as something else entirely. In the construction trailer, Stuart Tucker poured himself another beer and called Wilson Jones. It's done, boss. Hubbard's on his way to Seattle with his new identity. The confessions are signed and ready for distribution to law enforcement. And the other women? Patricia's team is contacting all of them with copies of the confession. They'll finally have the evidence they need to come forward if they choose to. Wilson's voice carried satisfaction across the phone line. Good work, Stuart. Make sure the Seattle contacts understand the situation. Michael Thompson gets honest work, but he also gets watched. Already arranged. He tries to run another con, and he'll find himself on another construction site having another educational conversation. After hanging up, Stuart walked outside and looked up at the desert stars. Somewhere out there, Matt Hubbard was learning the hardest lesson of his life. That some men built things while others destroyed them. And when the builders decided to fight back, the destroyers usually discovered they weren't as strong as they'd thought. Wilson Jones had taught his enemy the same lesson Kevin Barber had tried to teach him 25 years ago, that trust was a rope and ropes could be cut. But Wilson had learned something Kevin never understood, that sometimes, when you survive the fall, you came back with the tools to cut other people's ropes. And sometimes, that was the only way to build a foundation strong enough to last. Chapter 9. The Foundation Remains. 6 months later, Wilson Jones stood at the window of his office, surveying the completion of the Morrison project. The 30-story tower rose into the cloudy sky like a monument to persistence and proper planning, its foundation solid enough to withstand any storm. Eric entered without knocking, carrying architectural plans for their next development. At 25, he moved with the confidence of a man who'd learned hard lessons about loyalty and the price of betrayal. The divorce had aged him, but it had also strengthened him in ways that Wilson recognized and approved of. The Henderson project is ready for your approval, Eric said, spreading the blueprints across Wilson's desk. 40 units, luxury condominiums, projected completion in 18 months. Wilson studied the plans with the practiced eye of a man who'd built an empire from blueprints and determination. Foundation specs? Reinforced concrete, steel supports designed to last a century. Nothing's going to shake this one. They worked in comfortable silence for the next hour, father and son planning their next conquest of the city skyline. The easy partnership they developed since Tracy's departure reminded Wilson of the early days when he and Eric had worked construction sites together, teaching lessons about tools and materials and the importance of building things that lasted. Wilson's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Clements. Final report on Hubbard's situation. All 6 victims have come forward. Seattle PD confirmed subject is working honest construction jobs under new identity. No problems reported. Wilson smiled grimly. Matt Hubbard, now Michael Thompson, had discovered that honest work was harder than predatory manipulation, but ultimately more sustainable. The regular reports from Seattle indicated that he was adapting to his new life, though probably not by choice. Any word from Mom? Eric asked without looking up from the blueprints. Wilson considered the question carefully. Tracy had signed the divorce papers 3 months ago, accepting the settlement Wilson had offered rather than fighting for more. She'd moved to California, where she was reportedly working as an interior designer for a small firm in San Diego. No remarriage, no new relationships, no attempt to contact either Wilson or Eric. She's building a new life, Wilson said finally. Different foundation, but at least it's honest work. Eric nodded, understanding the subtext. Tracy had chosen betrayal over loyalty, excitement over stability, and she was living with the consequences. But she was living, which was more than Wilson might have allowed if she'd continued fighting him. Wilson's assistant knocked and entered with the afternoon mail. Among the bills and contracts was a handwritten envelope with no return address. Wilson opened it carefully, recognizing the handwriting immediately. Wilson, I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I did. Not just the affair, but everything that led to it. I destroyed our family for something that was never real, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. I hope someday Eric can forgive me, but I understand if he can't. Take care of our son. He's the best thing we ever built together. Tracy. Wilson read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it in his desk drawer. No response was needed or wanted. Tracy was learning the same lesson that Kevin Barber had learned in the mountains, that some ropes, once cut, could never be retied. Dad, Eric's voice brought Wilson back to the present. I've been thinking about expanding operations. Maybe opening an office in Denver, taking on some of those federal construction contracts. Wilson studied his son's face, seeing not just ambition, but the careful calculation of a man who'd learned to think in terms of foundations and permanence. That's a big step. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility? I think so, but I want to do it right. Build something that lasts, not just something that looks impressive. The answer pleased Wilson more than he showed. Eric had absorbed the lessons of the past year, understanding that true strength came from building rather than destroying, from loyalty rather than betrayal. Draw up a business plan. Include foundation specs, budget projections, and timeline for completion. We'll review it next week. As Eric gathered the blueprints and prepared to leave, Wilson called him back. Son, your mother's letter asked me to take care of you, but you don't need taking care of anymore. You've become a man who can build his own foundations. Eric smiled, the expression carrying warmth that reminded Wilson of better times. I learned from the best. After Eric left, Wilson returned to his window, watching the city spread beneath him like a three-dimensional blueprint. Every building told a story of planning and execution, of foundations laid deep enough to support the dreams built upon them. His phone rang. Jennifer Walsh's name appeared on the caller ID. Mr. Jones? I wanted to thank you again for everything you did. I got a job with a victims advocacy group here in Montana. We're helping other women who've been through what I experienced. Building something positive from the wreckage, Wilson observed. That's the only way to heal. I also wanted you to know, I testified against him yesterday. The prosecutor says with all the evidence you helped gather, Michael Thompson is going to prison for a long time. Wilson absorbed this information with satisfaction. Matt Hubbard's new identity had lasted exactly 6 months before his past caught up with him. The honest construction job in Seattle had been preparation for his real destination, a concrete cell where he would have years to contemplate the consequences of cutting other people's ropes. Justice as a way of finding its foundation, Wilson said simply. After the call ended, Wilson opened his desk drawer and pulled out the old climbing photograph of himself and Kevin Barber. 25 years ago, he'd been a young man who trusted completely and nearly died for it. The mountain had taught him that survival required vigilance, that loyalty was a luxury that had to be earned, and that some betrayals could only be answered with destruction. But the mountain had taught him something else, that a man could survive any fall if he was strong enough to climb back up and smart enough to cut the right ropes. Wilson placed the photograph in a frame and set it on his desk where he could see it every day, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a monument to survival. Kevin Barber had tried to teach him about weakness. Instead, he taught him about strength. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Jones, your 4 o'clock appointment is here. The City Planning Commission wants to discuss the new municipal complex project." Wilson straightened his tie and prepared for the meeting. Another project, another foundation to be laid, another permanent addition to the city he'd helped build. This was his legacy, not the marriages that failed or the friendships that betrayed, but the structures that would stand long after everyone involved was gone. Outside his window, the Morrison project caught the afternoon sunlight, its steel and concrete frame rising toward the sky with unshakable permanence. 30 stories of proof that some foundations, properly built, could support anything. Wilson Jones had learned the hardest lesson of all, that trust was indeed a rope, and ropes could be cut. But he'd also learned that a man who survived the fall could rebuild himself into something stronger than any rope, deeper than any foundation, and more permanent than any betrayal. The blizzard had ended 25 years ago. The mountain had taught its lessons. And the man who'd crawled out of that snowbank with a shattered leg had built an empire that would last forever. Some ropes.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.